It's the story of our lives, the most crucial issue, the most controversial, the very future of planet Earth. For almost 20 years, we've heard the warnings about climate change, yet so many of us know so little about it. We're told we should prepare for the worst, more floods, more storms, more droughts. And of course, it's all our fault. If we don't act now, if we don't change our way of life, the world as we know it is finished. But is it really that bad? Are we really doomed? The skeptics say no, not necessarily. But with so much at stake, can we risk it? Can we afford to sit back, do nothing, and hope for the best? It's strange but true. The devastating effects of global warming are often best seen in the most spectacular parts of the world. A story on the meltdown of the Arctic ice cap could easily be a picture postcard luring tourists to Greenland. Just this sublime, stark landscape where you're a mere witness to nature at its most spectacular. Just as a look at polar bears facing an ever-warming environment can become a face-to-face adventure. Oh my God. And even here at home, the beauty of this vast watery wilderness, South Australia's Coorong, blinds you to the fact this place is choking to death.
Where we're standing, it probably was almost a metre of water here just a year ago.
This isn't a lake or a waterway, it's a desert.
For almost 20 years now, we've travelled to these extraordinary places. Places which, if you believe the dire warnings of global warming, may be doomed. Certainly our Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, believes them. How big a challenge is climate change to mankind in 2008?
I think it's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenge for the century. And the reason's pretty clear, it affects everything.
So convinced is the federal government of the threat, it's about to introduce a controversial carbon tax that will not only change the way we live, but have a huge impact on our economy.
I'm not going to lie to you and say this is going to be cost-free. This is a tough decision. We need to take it for the country's long-term future and its long-term economic future. But the economic cost of not acting is massive. It's through the roof. Think about food production, the Murray. Think about the impact of tourism in Queensland, no more barrier reef. Kakadu, no more kakadu. Think about the impacts on jobs, it's huge.
How certain are you that mankind is the cause behind global warming?
Well, I just look at what the scientists say. And there's a group of scientists called the International Panel on Climate Change, 4,000 of them. Guys in white coats who run around and don't have a sense of humour. They just measure things. And what they say to us is that it's happening and it's caused by human activity.
Man's desire to create great economic wealth has fueled an unabashed lust for energy. It means we've treated the planet as a dump, pumping whatever we wanted, wherever we wanted. But increasingly, smokestacks have become symbols of environmental embarrassment rather than industrial envy. For years, the experts have told us these emissions cause global warming.
That's the most important thing. Stop burning coal and other fossil fuels and stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, because that's what's warming the atmosphere and that's what's driving these changes.
But we've also met the skeptics.
We need CO2. It's not a poison. It's not a pollutant. It's essential for life on Earth. I mean, how much are we going to depend on people's ignorance in order to produce panic?
They may not be as well known, but there are many scientists, in fact thousands around the world, who don't think carbon dioxide is the climate change culprit. Scientist and mathematician David Evans says man is not to blame, and so to cut carbon emissions is misguided.
I think it's an utter waste of time, so I'm speaking out. The picture that our decision makers have is wrong. It's going to cost us a lot of time and effort and money. It's going to make a lot of us a bit poorer. And there's no evidence that carbon emissions cause any significant warming at all.
So if nothing else, their heart's in the right place.
Well, sure. However, their brains are in the wrong place and we didn't elect them for their hearts. They've got to use their brains as well.
The ice gives a very clear story. I think it's our most visible evidence of global warming.
The science of climate change is relatively new, but relies on some very old evidence, as Liz Hayes discovered when she met Professor Lonnie Thompson on the Athabasca Glacier in the Canadian Rockies.
Now, Lonnie, is this an example of what you're talking about, this glacier?
Yes, if you look at the history here as we know it, it has retreated about 1.5 kilometers since 1844.
Glaciers, according to scientists like Lonnie Thompson, are the equivalent to the canary in the coal mine. When they start disappearing, we're all in trouble. And just about every glacier on the planet is melting.
What we've been seeing in the last 20 years is that rate is accelerating. And it's becoming fast even for a glacier.
No doubt the ice is melting, but the big question is, are we to blame? The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports it's 90% certain we are. But other equally eminent scientists believe what we're seeing is just part of nature's great cycle.
Now, since 1990, the Western governments have spent about $50 billion looking for evidence that carbon causes global warming, and they haven't found any.
That's number 20.
Dr. David Evans has 6 university degrees and once worked for the Australian government's Greenhouse Office. But he no longer thinks global warming is caused by our carbon dioxide.
Not very warm today.
And so isn't concerned about his or anyone else's carbon footprint. So does that mean don't give up your V8 cars? Does that mean continue flying? Don't worry about changing light bulbs? You know, don't worry about trying to capture carbon or shutting down coal-fired power stations? Is that what that means?
Well, I'm just here to report on modern science and where it's up to. Personally, I don't worry about those things too much, no.
Perhaps nowhere in the world is there more compelling evidence against the man-made carbon dioxide argument than Greenland. Long before the industrial age, the Vikings lived here and happily grew wheat and vegetables. It was known as the medieval warm period, and temperatures were even hotter than they are today. For 400 years, the Vikings called Greenland home. Now, no one really understands why they suddenly disappeared, but most historians believe that there was a harsh cold snap. And unable to adapt, the Vikings became Greenland's early victims of climate change. 1,000 years on, Greenland is enjoying another warm period, and for the first time since then, growing a variety of vegetables.
Oh yes, it is pretty.
It's like you're in a lolly shop.
Yeah, that's right.
While some believe this warming could simply be part of the world's natural cycle, not so former US Vice President Al Gore. In his Oscar-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, he paints an apocalyptic picture of the future. Rising seas, longer, nastier droughts, more severe storms, more misery, unless we make drastic cuts to our emissions.
When there is more carbon dioxide, the temperature gets warmer because it traps more heat from the sun inside.
Everyone agrees the solution to climate change is decarbonisation. Stop the carbon emissions.
With respect, Al Gore has been saying that the debate is over since 1991. We've learned a great deal about the climate since 1991.
And what we should know, according to David Evans, is since 2001, temperatures around the world have stopped rising, and that's despite increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the air. So statistically, in the last 7 years, the flattening and perhaps even slight cooling of temperatures, is that significant? Or is it too short
it's
period
significant.
of time?
Once it gets up to 5 years or so, it's really quite significant. Whatever was driving the temperatures up has taken a break for a while, and meanwhile carbon emissions have continued, and the level of carbon in the atmosphere has gone up about 5% since 2001, yet we see no more warming.
Here's a measurement which I think people should just sit back and pay a bit of attention to. The 12 hottest years in human history have occurred in the last 13 years. That's a fact.
It's not my position to correct you, Prime Minister, but I've been told that, in fact, during the Middle Ages, the global temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees warmer than now. Certainly we've had the hottest 12 years in recent history, but the planet's been a lot hotter.
Well, I stand by what the International Panel of Climate Change Scientists have had to say. There will always be argy-bargy about elements of the detail.
Global warming certainly attracts lots of argy-bargy, but there is one thing climate scientists agree on. If global warming is caused by CO2 emissions, then the CO2 will leave a distinct signature. Their computer models predict a big red hotspot over the equator. The only problem is thousands of weather balloons equipped with some very sophisticated thermometers have measured the temperatures in the atmosphere to test the theory. And guess what? No hotspots.
There's no hotspot. There's no hotspot at all. It's not even a little hotspot and it's missing. We couldn't find it.
So this is the crux for you, this is the evidence.
Yes. If this had come out the other way, if we'd measured it and we'd found a hotspot, I'd be saying cut back carbon emissions.
Very simple question. Is there any chance you're looking in the wrong spot?
No.
But still, carbon emissions are blamed for global warming. And in turn, global warming seems to be at the heart of every grim climate story we've reported in the last 20 years.
I have spent a lifetime reporting drought in Australia, but this time even I'm surprised.
Certainly, Charles Woolley thought he'd seen drastic climate change close up in country New South Wales.
Because, believe it or not, this is the reservoir for the city of Goulburn. Now down to 8% of capacity. If it were full, I should be 10 metres underwater.
The last 5.5 years of rainfall are 25% below the 100-year average. So this is not only dry, it's a big dry.
That was June 2005, and thankfully since then, much of Australia has received rain.
This is an oasis in an otherwise dry landscape. You like talking about this stuff, don't you? Who bloody wouldn't?
But even when an 8-year-long drought breaks and the beauty of new life appears, the overwhelming question remains: how our land will cope with predicted bigger dries of the future.
Our concern is really that the timing between drinks is changing. It's getting longer because of climate change, because of development.
If the water goes up or down just a little bit, then their very survival, their existence, is on a knife's edge.
In Australia, we're the hottest and driest continent on the planet now. We therefore stand to be hit hardest and earliest. Something's happening, it's very big, and it's irresponsible not to act.
What to do is the mega billion-dollar question. There are alternatives to powering our world without the carbon fallout of coal and oil, but all have their negatives. The great hope was to replace fossil fuels with biofuels, like palm oil. But the plantations are so vast in places like Indonesia, entire jungles are being wiped out, as are the precious orangutans who live in them.
Trouble is, forests are getting harder and harder to find, and it's not surprising when you take a look at this.
Then there's wind power. It might make us feel good, but there's just not enough puff in it.
At the best, wind power can not provide more than a tiny fraction of the energy needs of civilization. I think it's one of those things politicians like, because it can be seen that they're doing something.
And nuclear power may be embraced by France and Finland as a green and efficient energy source, but who could ever forget Richard Carlton in the remnants of the Chernobyl reactor?
The man sitting at one of these panels here pushed one of these buttons and set off the worst nuclear disaster the world has ever seen.
In Australia, the spectre of a nuclear meltdown is politically too hot to handle.
Is that no to nuclear power?
Well, our attitude is that this country has enormous energy sources, both traditional, carbon-based energy, as well as renewable in the forms of solar, wind, geothermal. And on coal, we have a particular responsibility to pioneer and, if we can, perfect, and if possible, apply at commercially meaningful levels clean coal technology.
If we can clean up coal, we can save a $25 billion energy industry and 30,000 jobs. But that technology is still probably 5 years away. And so more immediately, our Prime Minister wants to cut emissions by putting a cost on carbon. Mr Rudd calls it a carbon pollution reduction scheme. Big emitters will have to buy permits to pollute. It's hoped that this will act as an incentive to make them cleaner. But of course they're going to pass all their costs on to us and we'll end up paying more for everything. In the short term, the government will compensate some industries and some householders, but ultimately our whole way of life will change.
Is it going to wreck our economy?
The key thing is, how do you bring carbon pollution down in an economically responsible fashion? And having looked at all the detail, this is the best way forward.
But if you believe the skeptics and carbon dioxide isn't to blame for global warming, then we face massive change for no good reason.
Isn't it a bit dopey to wreck the economy for a purely theoretical reason when the alleged symptom, warming, stopped 6 years ago?
They perhaps would use the word prudent as opposed to dopey, that the risk of not doing something is too great.
I urge them to look at the modern science. The evidence isn't there. There is no evidence that carbon emissions cause a significant amount of global warming.
I am not, myself, a qualified scientist. I'm elected as Prime Minister of Australia to act on the basis of the considered scientific advice.
But it's never too late to continue the debate, is it?
Look at your kids in the eye tonight and ask yourself this question. If we had this much evidence available to us now on climate change and just refused to act, then what are the consequences for them? The alternative, however, is to just stick your head in the sand and hope it all goes away.
Hello, I'm Tom Steinfort. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au, as well as the 9Now app.